The galaxy knew them as monsters. They called themselves humanity. For centuries, the Galactic Accord observed this young, ferocious species from a safe distance, documenting their wars, their reckless expansion, and their terrifying emotional volatility. They were classified as a typhoon-level civilization, a force of nature to be contained, never to be engaged. To invite them into a fight was considered an act of ultimate desperation. Commander Kalen of the Serene, long-lived illusions, believed every word of the reports. He had seen the grainy footage of human battlefield fury, heard the psychological profiles detailing their predatory empathy. When the Devourers swarm, a silent, galaxy-consuming blight of biomechanical horrors, shattered the Accord's core fleets and poured towards Elusia, his homeworld, the vote was unanimous. The Accord would cut its losses, quarantine the sector, and sacrifice 1 billion Illusion lives to slow the swarm. There was no hope. Kalen, in a final act of defiance, broke protocol. He sent a single, untraceable, wideband distress pulse into the dark, towards the one region of space everyone avoided, Sol. The humans answered, not with words of condolence or strategic questions, but with 2 coordinates and a time. They were coming. Kalen prepared to welcome barbarians, to trade one doom for another. He was ready for their brutality, their arrogance, their chaos. What he was not ready for was their laughter in the face of the void, their songs that shook the metal of the star ships, or the way they looked at the looming, galaxy-ending shadow of the swarm and simply said, "All right then, let's dance." And he was utterly, soul-shakingly unprepared for the day he stood beside them, saw their true nature unleashed not in rage, but in cold, calculated, self-sacrificial defiance, and felt for the first time in his 5 centuries of life a true and primal fear, not of the swarm, but of what his allies were willing to become to ensure it died. The bridge of the Illusion command ship Selena's Grace was a tomb of quiet despair. The soft, bioluminescent glow from the panels painted the crew's faces in hues of blue and gray, highlighting the stark fear in their wide, violet eyes. Screens showed the terrible, beautiful silence of the Devourer swarm's advance, a wave of jagged, chitinous ships that absorbed starlight, communication, and hope in equal measure. Commander Kalen's long fingers trembled slightly as he dismissed the final transmission from the Galactic Accord High Command. The words quarantine and strategic withdrawal echoed in his mind, a polite death sentence for his homeworld, Elusia, hanging like a green jewel in the nearby system. "They have abandoned us," First Officer Lyra said, her voice a melodic whisper that now carried the weight of a dying star. "There is no protocol left." Kalen stared at the tactical display. Their fleet, elegant vessels of crystalline and light, was a fragile barrier against the oncoming darkness. The swarm did not fight. It consumed. It did not communicate. It erased. Every weapon the Accord possessed had been tested and found useless. The swarm adapted, evolved between volleys, turning their own technology against them. It was like fighting the concept of entropy itself. A reckless, forbidden thought, nurtured in the darkest corner of his despair, surfaced. There was one species the Accord had never dared to employ, whose files were stamped with warnings in psychic ink that seemed to bleed from the data slates. Homo sapiens. Typhoon level. Unstable. Hyper-aggressive. Emotionally contagious. Do not engage. There is one protocol, Kalen said, his voice alien to his own ears. The final, unthinkable one. Lyra turned, her elegant features etched with horror. The humans? Commander, they are vermin with hyperdrives. They will loot our world before the swarm even arrives. Their psychology is one of conquest, not cooperation. The Accord psychology is one of surrender, Kalen countered, a spark of his people's ancient pride flickering. I will not watch Elusia be digested in silence. Bring me the clandestine transmitter, the one that bypasses Accord channels. The message was short, stripped of all military coding, a raw scream into the dark. Elusia besieged by Devourer swarm. No aid coming. facing annihilation. Any who would stand, we beg you. Coordinates attached. He aimed it squarely at the Sol system, a shotgun blast of desperation. He expected silence. Or worse, a cacophony of predatory signals, the chattering of wolves who had smelled a dying herd. The reply came in 6 hours. It was not on any standard Accord frequency, but on a barbaric wideband audio channel that screeched across their communication systems with the subtlety of a physical blow. It was a human voice, female, scratchy with static, and an undercurrent of something Kalen could not identify. Illusion vessel. This is Captain Mara Silas of the Terran void ship Unyielding Resolve. We read your scream. Stand by. Transmitting approach vector and rendezvous time. Don't shoot at the pretty lights. Silas out. 2 sets of coordinates and a time stamp followed. No request for payment, no demands for surrender, no complex treaty negotiations. Just a statement of arrival. The bridge crew stared at each other, bewildered. Pretty lights. They arrived exactly at the designated time, but not at the designated location. Space ahead of the Seleners Grace rippled and tore, not with the gentle slipstream of Accord hyperdrives, but with a violent, reality-rending shriek that made the ship's sensors wail in protest. From the wound in space-time, the human vessel emerged. It was nothing like the graceful, organic lines of Illusion design or the blocky functionality of Accord craft. The Unyielding Resolve was a brutalist sculpture of armored plating, weapon mounts, and industrial gritting. It looked less built and more forged in some stellar furnace. Scorch marks and impact craters pockmarked its hull, each one a story of violence. It moved with a jarring, purposeful thrust, eschewing grace for raw, directed power. It was, Kalen thought with a sinking heart, a weapon that had somehow learned to fly. A visual link established. The human bridge was a dimly lit chaos of flickering screens, physical switches, and worn metal. The crew wore functional, stained uniforms, and they moved with a restless, contained energy. At the center sat Captain Silas. She was older than Kalen expected, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined not with age, but with what looked like constant squinting in a hostile sun's. Her eyes were the most unsettling part, a calm, weathered gray that held none of the panic saturating his own bridge. Commander Kalen, she said, her voice now clear, devoid of the earlier static. We've reviewed your tactical data on the swarm. Nasty bit of work. We're setting up a mobile command link. My XO, Commander Rourke, will coordinate with your tactical team. A second human, a massive man with a shaved head and a scar across his throat, gave a curt nod. We'll need full sensor integration. Real time. No filters. Lyra, regaining some composure, spoke. Captain Silas, we'd appreciate your response. The Accord has quarantined us. This is a suicide mission. What are your terms? What does Terra demand for this intervention? Silas leaned back in her command chair, which creaked in protest. She didn't smile, but something shifted in her eyes. Terms? Lady, a bunch of bug robots are about to eat a planet full of thinking, feeling people. The terms are we stop them. You can thank us later with a bottle of whatever it is you drink that doesn't taste like filtered starlight. She glanced off-screen. Rourke, get the carnival prepped. And tell the Marines to stop drawing rude pictures on the anti-swarm ordinance. We have guests. The link cut. Kalen was left reeling. No demands. No grandstanding. Just an immediate, baffling pivot to action. What is the carnival? He asked his confused sensor officer. They found out 12 hours later, as the first swarm tendrils entered the system. The human ship, which had been a brooding monolith, suddenly bloomed. Dozens of smaller craft, fighters, gunships, drone carriers, erupted from its bays like angry hornets. They moved in patterns that defied Accord tactical doctrine, a chaotic, swirling ballet of aggression. The humans called it the Carnival of Carnage, over the open comms, a name that filled Kalen with dread. The battle was joined. The illusion ships fired precise, lancing beams of coherent light, scoring clean hits on swarm vessels that then swiftly regenerated or adapted their shielding. The humans fought differently. They used kinetic weapons, massive railguns that hurled solid projectiles at a fraction of light speed, shredding swarm hulls with primitive, brutal physics. They used targeted EMP bursts not to disable, but to confuse the swarm's adaptive network, creating moments of vulnerability. They used close-range plasma cutters and, on one insane occasion, a boarding pod that latched onto a swarm vessel and detonated from within. Kaylin watched, horrified and fascinated, as a human fighter pilot, her craft crippled, deliberately rammed her ship into the maw of a swarm carrier, ejecting at the last second, and whooping with what sounded like joy over the comms as her dying vessel caused a catastrophic chain reaction. "They are insane," Lyra whispered, her voice full of a new kind of awe. "They treat war like a game." But it was working. The swarm advance slowed. For the first time, the silent devourers seemed to hesitate, their perfect, adaptive logic struggling to parse the chaotic, sacrificial, and unpredictably violent response. As the first battle lulled, a human shuttle docked with the Saliner's Grace. Captain Silas, dressed in simple combat fatigues, stepped onto the Illusion deck. The contrast was jarring. She was surrounded by the serene beauty of Illusion architecture, yet she carried the smell of oil, ozone, and sweat. Her eyes met Kaylin's. "You held the line," she said matter-of-factly. "Good. Now, your energy weapons are fancy, but they're giving the swarm a nice warm meal. We need to mix it up. I brought schematics for some simple kinetic artillery you can mount on your cruisers. Your engineers will figure it out." Kaylin found his voice. "Captain, your pilot." She sacrificed herself. Silas's expression didn't change. "Lieutenant Vega." "Yeah, she bought us 12 minutes and a hole in their left flank. Good trade." "A trade?" "A life for tactical advantage." Kaylin was appalled. For the first time, Silas's calm mask flickered. Something harder, older, shone through. "Commander, out here, everything's a trade. Her life, for the time, we need to get the planetary shield generators online. The swarm doesn't take prisoners. It doesn't offer surrender. It just takes. So we give it something it doesn't expect. We give it us. In pieces if we have to." She walked over to a viewport, looking out at the debris field, a mix of crystalline illusion shards and black organic swarm wreckage. "You ask what we demand. We demand a chance. For you, for us. That's the only term that's ever mattered." She turned, and her gaze was no longer that of a barbarian warlord, but of a weary guardian. "Now let's get to work. The main swarm body will be here in 48 hours. And the real party is about to start." As she walked away, already barking orders to her accompanying engineers in that sharp, rhythmic language, Kaylin felt the first cold trickle of it. Not fear of the swarm. Not even fear of the humans' brutality. It was the fear of beginning to understand their calculus, a math where individual lives were variables in an equation for survival, and the answer was always terrifyingly written in blood and resolve. The 48 hours were a blur of frantic, dissonant activity. The serene halls of the Saliner's Grace echoed with the clang of human engineers welding crude, robust kinetic artillery mounts onto the ship's elegant superstructure. Illusion technicians, their delicate hands enused to such brutish tools, worked alongside sweating, grinning humans who offered sticks of synthetic gum and called them sparkly elves with a tone that sounded oddly affectionate. The air, once scented with mild antiseptic and floral vapors, now carried the sharp tang of ozone, hot metal, and an earthy scent the humans called coffee. Kaylin observed it all from his command platform, a knot of conflicting emotions tightening in his chest. He had accessed the limited, unsettling files on human psychology. They spoke of combat bonding, of emotional transference, and warned of their manipulative empathy. Watching a burly human sergeant patiently show a slender illusion engineer how to calibrate a magnetic rail slug, laughing when she flinched at the weapon's recoil simulator, didn't seem manipulative. It seemed genuine. It was more confusing than their violence. Captain Silas was a constant, unsettling presence. She seemed to need no sleep. Kalen would find her in the tactical bay at all hours, her eyes scanning the updated swarm trajectories, humming a tuneless, grim melody. She had integrated their command structures with a ruthless efficiency that bypassed all Accord protocol. Her XO, Rourke, was now essentially co-commanding the Saliner's Grace's defenses, his voice a gravelly counterpoint to Lyra's soft-spoken commands. "They're not just adapting to our tactics," Rourke said during one joint briefing, pointing a thick finger at a hologram of the swarm. "They're learning our patterns, our decision cycles. Your ships move on predictable harmonic frequencies. Your attacks are mathematically optimal. The swarm's eating that up. It's forecasting you." "What do you propose?" Kalen asked, dreading the answer. "Randomness," Silas said, entering the room with a data slate in hand. "Controlled chaos. We break our own patterns before they can. We're going to stage a feint here, in the debris field of the first engagement. Make it look like we're consolidating for a last stand. Then, we hit them here." She stabbed a location far from the feint, a vulnerable-looking tendril of the swarm that was arcing towards Illusia's outer moon. "With everything we have, a knockout punch before the main body arrives." "It is a massive risk," Lyra protested. "If the swarm does not take the bait, or if it adapts too quickly, we will have committed our combined fleet to a position from which retreat is impossible." "Retreat to where?" Silas asked, her voice quiet. "Your Accord friends have locked the door behind us. This is it. The line is here. We don't hold it by being smarter than the swarm. We can't be. We hold it by being crazier, by doing the thing it logically cannot predict because it's goddamn stupid." The plan, dubbed Operation Bad Joke by the humans, was set in motion. The feint was a masterpiece of deception. Damaged Illusion ships broadcast distress signals on loop. Human vessels leaked fake drive signatures and life sign readings, creating the illusion of a desperate, wounded fleet licking its wounds. The swarm's main body, a vast, dark cloud blotting out the stars, shifted course imperceptibly, drawn towards the decoy like a shark to blood. Kalen's heart hammered against his ribs as he watched the tactical display from the bridge of the unyielding Resolve, where he had been invited by Silas. "Why am I here?" he had asked. "So you can see the punchline land," she had replied. Now, as the swarm vanguard entered the kill zone of the feint, Silas nodded to Rourke. "Cue the fireworks." The fireworks were a series of strategically placed gravity mines and subspace distortions left by the humans, hidden amongst the wreckage. They didn't explode with light and heat, but with localized space-time anomalies that twisted swarm vessels into impossible shapes, tearing them apart with the fundamental forces of the universe. It wasn't an attack. It was a grotesque physics lesson. Simultaneously, the combined Illusion-human strike force, hidden behind the bulk of Illusia's moon, powered their drives to maximum and shot towards the isolated swarm tendril. The human ships, true to their nature, broke formation immediately, engaging in their chaotic carnival patterns. The newly outfitted Illusion ships, following Rourke's barked orders, fired their kinetic weapons in staggered, randomized volleys. The effect was immediate and shocking. The swarm tendril, cut off from the adaptive hull of the main body for a critical few minutes, reeled. Its ships, designed to counter precise energy weapons and predictable tactics, scrambled. Chitinous hulls, resistant to plasma, shattered under the relentless hail of tungsten slugs. For a glorious, breathless hour, it was not a battle of attrition, but of annihilation. The tendril was severed, cleansed from the void. A ragged cheer went up on the human bridge. Silas allowed herself a tight, grim smile. On the Saliner's Grace, Lyra and her crew looked at each other in stunned disbelief. They had won a victory, a real one. The celebration was short-lived. The main swarm body, realizing the deception, ceased its advance towards the feint. It didn't turn. It didn't maneuver. It simply changed. On the sensors, the entire cloud of vessels pulsed with a sickly, synchronized light. Then, it began to accelerate directly towards Illusia itself, ignoring the Allied fleet completely. Its adaptation was horrifyingly simple. It had calculated that the fleet could be dealt with later. The planet was the objective. They're going for a planetary consumption strike, Rourke growled. They'll blanket the surface, start digesting the biosphere. Game over. Panic, cold, and total seized Kalen. His home, his family in the shielded cities below, everything he was fighting for, it was all about to be swallowed. The tactical brilliance of Bad Joke now seemed like a childish prank. Silas's voice cut through the rising dread on the comms, calm and flat. All units, new targeting priority. We engage the lead elements. We slow them down. Resolve, bring the anvil online. Prepare for a rolling thunder sequence. Kalen turned to her. Captain, your ship cannot stop that. Nothing can. We're not going to stop it, she said, her eyes fixed on the screen showing the green orb of Elysia. We're going to give it a headache, so bad it has to stop, and think. She opened a fleet-wide channel. Listen up. The pretty plan is over. Now we do what we do best. We get in its way. We are the wall it did not expect to find here, and we will bleed for every kilometer it advances. She looked at Kalen, and for a fleeting second, he saw past the weariness, past the calm, into a deep, cold well of resolve that had seen abysses he could not fathom. Commander, get to your ship. Let your people fight for your home. We'll be the noisy neighbors. As Kalen was shuttled back to the Saliner's Grace, he watched the unyielding resolve and its attendant human vessels form up not into a defensive line, but into a spearhead. They were positioning themselves between the swarm and Elysia, not to block, but to penetrate. They were going to fly straight into the heart of the darkness. The fear that had been a trickle became a cold river in his veins. It wasn't the fear of losing. It was the fear of what victory would cost, and the dawning, terrible realization that the humans had already done the math and found the cost acceptable. They were going to pay it in flesh and metal, and they were going to do it with what sounded over the open human comms like singing. A rough, rhythmic, defiant chant as they powered their drives and flew into the teeth of the galaxy's ending. The singing stopped the moment the first human ship made contact. It was replaced by a symphony of control violence. The unyielding resolve led the charge, its forward plasma lances carving fiery trenches through the leading edge of the swarm. It was not a ship fighting. It was a berserker, a blunt instrument swung with terrifying precision. The human carnival swarm broke around it, a cyclone of fighters and gunships that seemed to thrive in the chaotic energy wash of the larger vessels passing. From the bridge of the Saliner's Grace, Kalen ordered his fleet to support. Their new kinetic weapons thrummed, hurling projectiles into the maelstrom. They were effective, but watching the humans was like watching a natural disaster. A human gunship, its engine shot out, used its remaining thrust to spin like a top, its lateral guns blasting swarm drones to pieces until it was finally pulverized. A squadron of fighters, boxed in, didn't try to escape. They formed a tight sphere, guns outward, and detonated a shaped plasma charge in their center, vaporizing themselves and everything within a kilometer. They are not just sacrificing units, Lyra reported, her voice trembling with a new kind of shock. They are weaponizing their own destruction. The swarm reacted. It always did. It began to emit a pervasive dampening field that sapped energy from shields and engines. The elegant power systems of the Elysian ships immediately began to fail, their lights dimming, their drives sputtering. The human ships, with their rugged, redundant, and horrifyingly simple fusion reactors, were less affected. Their shields flickered, but held. Their engines roared on. Adapt to this. Kalen heard Silas snarl over the command channel, her voice strained as the resolve shuddered under a concentrated assault. Rourke, implement Scorched Sky protocol. On my mark. What followed was not a tactical maneuver. It was an act of environmental warfare. From the belly of the unyielding resolve, a dozen projectiles launched, not at swarm ships, but into the empty space between them. They detonated in silence, releasing not explosives, but a rapidly expanding cloud of microscopic, self-replicating nanites, a human counterswarm. These were not builders or healers. They were gray goo, programmed for one purpose: to disassemble any non-terra matter they touched, using it to replicate more of themselves. The swarm's dampening field interacted with the nanite cloud. The result was a catastrophic failure in the swarm's own cohesion. Ships caught in the gray goo began to corrode at a visible rate, their sleek chitin boiling away into a silvery mist that then joined the attacking cloud. The swarm's adaptation, this time, was too slow. The human weapon was too primal, too final. It didn't try to outsmart the swarm's technology. It sought to unmake its very substance. But the weapon was indiscriminate. A damaged illusion cruiser, drifting too close to the expanding cloud, had a hull breach touched by the silver mist. In minutes, the ship was a dissolving sculpture, its crew's fate too horrifying to contemplate. Silas's order had been given knowing this. She had traded an illusion ship, and who knows how many other pieces of the battlefield, for a decisive advantage. The cold river of fear in Kalen's heart froze solid. This was the calculus he had glimpsed. This was the trade. The humans fought with tools that respected no boundaries, that made no distinction between enemy and collateral damage in their pursuit of victory. They were a force of nature, just as the Accord files had said, a force that could save you while it was in the process of drowning your allies. The swarm's advance towards Elugia slowed, then stopped, as it struggled to contain the nanite plague eating its vanguard. A window opened, a fragile, terrible window. Silas's voice came through hoarse. Kalen, the path to the planet is clearer. Not clear, but clearer. You need to get every civilian transport, every fast courier, off that world. Now, we bought you hours, maybe a day. The anvil is spent, and the swarm will cook up a counter to the gray goose sooner than we'd like. You contaminated the battlefield. You kill my people. The accusation burst from Kalen, raw with grief and terror. There was a long silence on the channel, filled only with the static of dying ships. When Silas spoke again, the weariness was absolute. I know, and I will bear their names, and the names of my own who died deploying it until the day I die, which might be today. Your people on the planet, Commander, billions of them. The math is ugly. It always is. Now move. The order was a splash of ice water. He pushed his horror aside. The evacuation. She was right. He began barking orders, coordinating with Elugia's planetary government, mobilizing every ship that could hold a living soul. The human fleet, battered and bleeding, regrouped into a defensive perimeter around the planet, a battered shield against the temporarily confused swarm. Later, during a lull, a human shuttle docked with the Saliner's Grace again. It was not Silas this time, but Commander Rourke. The big man's uniform was stained with soot and what looked like dried coolant. He carried a simple crate. He found Kalen in the tactical bay, staring blankly at the evacuation progress reports. Captain sends this, Rourke said, his voice a low rumble. He placed the crate on the table. It was full of small metallic discs, human dog tags, from the crews of the ships we lost in the Scorched Sky deployment, and from the crew of your cruiser, the Dawn's Mercy. We recovered what we could. Kalen looked at the tags, at the strange, angular human names stamped into them. Why? Rourke sighed, a sound like rocks grinding. Because we remember. We remember every single one. The math might force our hand, Commander, but it doesn't clean the blood off. Silas, she'll have the names of your people added to our memorial wall on Mars, right next to Vega and all the others. He paused, choosing his words with a care that belied his brutish appearance. You think we're monsters. I get it. Maybe we are. But monsters are what you need when the night is full of real dragons. We'll be the monsters that stand between the dragon and the village, even if the village is afraid of us. Even if we break a few walls doing it. He turned to leave, then stopped. The evacuation. We'll hold the line as long as we can. But Silas has one more play. A last joke. You're not going to like it. After Rourke left, Kalen picked up one of the illusion tags, a smooth crystal inscribed with soft light. He held it next to a human tag, cold stamped steel. Different. So different. And yet, both were here in this crate in this fight. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his gut. But mixed with it now was a sliver of something else, a horrific, reluctant understanding. The humans were not fearless. They were something worse. They were resolved. They had stared into the abyss of hard choices long ago and had not blinked. And that, Kalen realized, was the true source of his fear. Not their violence, but the terrible weight of the decisions that lay behind it, and the grim willingness to carry that weight forever. The evacuation of Elugia was a symphony of silent screams. Millions flowed into orbital freighters, passenger liners, and anything with a functioning engine. From orbit, the planet's night side, usually dotted with soft clusters of city lights, was now a frantic, crawling constellation of ascending ships. The day side showed the swarm's shadow creeping across the continents, a blight of static on the sensors where its precursor spores were already choking the atmosphere. The human fleet was a shattered ring of iron holding that shadow at bay. The unyielding resolve was now barely that. Its port-side armor was a mangled ruin. One of its main engines was dark, and its communications array sparked fitfully. But it still floated, guns still firing, a defiant fist clenched against the dark. Kalen had moved his command to a secondary illusion vessel, the Evening Star, to oversee the evacuation. The reports from Silas were terse, growing more infrequent as the swarm pressure increased. The gray goo cloud had been contained and neutralized by the swarm, which had now begun to emit a high-frequency vibration that shattered the nanites. The adaptation was complete. The window was closing. We are at 70% evacuation of priority personnel and civilians from the shielded cities, Lyra reported, her eyes hollow. The outer settlements, we cannot reach them. The swarm's atmospheric interference is too strong. Kalen nodded. The weight of those uncountable lives a physical pain. Understood. Continue. A new signal cut through, weak and laden with static. It was Silas. Kalen, can you hear? Anvil is gone. Shields at percent. We have maybe one more coordinated push in us. After that, it's piecemeal. Captain, you must withdraw, Kalen urged, the words tasting like ash. Your ship is dying. Fall back to the rally point. We will cover you. A dry, crackling sound that might have been a laugh came through. Fall back. Commander, with a distraction. The Resolve hasn't been a warship for the last 3 hours. It's been a beacon. We've been pumping out every ounce of power, every weird signal, every bit of electronic noise we can think of. We're the brightest, noisiest, most annoying target in the system. And the swarm, bless its simple mind, can't ignore it. The truth dawned on Kalen, cold and horrific. You are not trying to stop it. You are leading it. Bingo, Silas's voice guttered. Rourke's last joke. Operation. Peepeepa. The main swarm body is consolidating around us. We're going to give them a final, lovely target to focus on while your people run. And then we're going to take them on a trip. To where? Kalen demanded, though he already knew. The system's brown dwarf. The one your charts list as gravity, well, theta. We've been prepping the Resolve's core for a manual overload. A big one. We drag the swarm into the gravity well, light the fuse, and give them a new sun to think about. It was suicide, not the brave, battlefield suicide of a pilot ramming a fighter, but a cold, premeditated, total self-annihilation. A trap with themselves as the bait and the payload. You cannot. There must be another way. We can fight together. We can know, Kalen. Her voice was suddenly clear, fierce, and final. We can't. This is the math. One ship, one crew, for a chance to save 1 billion lives, and the fleet that can protect them. This is the trade. The only one left. She paused, and her voice softened, just a fraction. Tell your people. Tell them the monsters from Sol weren't so bad. And tell Mind. Tell Terra we did the job. We held the line. The transmission ended. On the tactical display, Kalen watched as the limping, burning, unyielding Resolve, surrounded by its few remaining attendant vessels, began a slow, deliberate burn. Not away from the swarm, but through it, carving a path towards the system's edge, towards the hungry pull of the brown dwarf. And the swarm, true to its predatory nature, followed. The main body of the devouring cloud shifted, detaching from Elugia, drawn by the wounded, defiant giant leading it away. The fear that had been Kalen's constant companion crystallized. It was no longer fear of the humans. It was a profound, soul-deep fear for them. It was the terror of witnessing a courage so absolute it became alien, of watching beings look into the absolute void of oblivion and not just accept it, but use it as a weapon. He feared the galaxy that had forced such a species to exist. He feared the cost of their love, which was as boundless and terrifying as their wrath. For hours, the silent drama played out. The evacuation continued unimpeded. The swarm was gone, chasing its tormentor into the dark. The Evening Star's sensors were locked on the Resolve's fading transponder signal as it approached the brown dwarf's crushing gravitational field. The final transmission from the human ship was not on any command channel. It was a raw, open broadcast, a snippet of audio that played across every speaker in the Illusion fleet. It was not the sound of prayers or screams or heroic last words. It was the sound of singing again. The same rough, rhythmic chant from before, but slower now, more solemn. Dozens of voices, men and women, raised together. They sang words Kalen did not know, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a lament. It was a defiance. It was a farewell. The signal stretched, distorted by the immense gravity, and then a new star blossomed on the edge of the system. A brief, terrible, and beautiful point of light that outshone the brown dwarf for a single, searing moment before fading into the infrared. The swarm's signal, every last trace of it clustered around that point of light, vanished. Silence. The bridge of the Evening Star was utterly silent. The crew stood frozen, staring at the screens that showed a clear path to a now-safe Elugia, and an empty space where a storm of iron and Resolve had once been. Lyra was the first to move. She slowly saluted, not the Illusion way, but the human way she had seen Rourke use, fingers to brow. One by one, every officer on the bridge followed suit. Kalen did not salute. He could not. He simply stood, the true, final fear now a part of him. He had fought side by side with humanity. He had seen them laugh, sacrifice, and wield their own destruction as a tool. And in their final, supreme act of calculated, merciful violence, they had shown him the terrifying depth of what it meant to care. To care enough to become the monster. To care enough to walk into the dark so others could stay in the light. He finally understood. The Accord's fear of humanity was a child's fear of the dark. His fear, the one he felt now, was the adult's fear of the match, a tiny, fragile thing that could burn down a forest to save it from a worse blight. Humanity was that match, and he would spend the rest of his life fearing the day it might need to be struck again, and mourning the beautiful, terrible light it had cast today. The silence in the wake of the brown dwarf's brief, artificial sunrise was a physical presence. On the bridge of the Evening Star, the Illusion crew moved like ghosts, their voices hushed. The tactical displays were clear. The Devourer's swarm was gone, its signals erased by the gravitational detonation. Elugia hung in the void, scarred but intact, its atmosphere still tinged with the toxic residue of the swarm's precursors, but its biosphere, its cities, its billions of souls were saved. Kalen gave the orders on autopilot. Evacuation ships were to return to orbit. Damage assessments began. Calls for aid, once ignored, were now being answered by a suddenly remorseful and curious galactic accord. The quarantine was lifted. Offers of humanitarian aid and reconstruction flooded in. It was over. But for Kalen it was not. The fear had settled into his bones, a permanent, low hum in his psyche. He oversaw the initial relief efforts, coordinated with the Accord observers who arrived with a mixture of awe and thinly veiled suspicion, and gave 100 debriefings. He spoke of human tactics, their technology, their nature. He used the clinical, detached language of a military report, but the words felt hollow, inadequate to contain the reality. A week after the battle, a single ship translated into the system. It was not an Accord vessel. It was a human ship, but unlike the unyielding Resolve, it was smaller, sleeker, a dagger of gray metal with no visible weapons ports. It bore the name Whispering Archive. It requested, and was granted, permission to dock with the Evening Star. The being that disembarked was not a soldier. She was an elderly human woman, her back straight, her hair white, and cut short, her eyes the same calm gray as Silas's, but holding a different kind of depth, the depth of memory, not immediate crisis. She wore a simple, dark uniform devoid of rank, but on her collar was a single, small pin, a stylized wall. "Commander Kalen," she said, her voice soft but carrying. "Iam archivistli. I am here for the remembrance." Kalen led her to a quiet observation lounge. The stars outside were deceptively peaceful. The remembrance? Archivistli nudda. For every human life given in the defense of another. For every name added to the wall. We come. We listen. We record. We remember. She placed a small, crystalline device on the table between them. Captain Mara Silas, Commander Arlen Rourke, Lieutenant Anya Vega, and the 742 other souls of the unyielding Resolve have been inscribed. Their actions, their final transmission, are now part of our eternal record. But the wall also holds the names of the 4,118 Illusion crew of the Dawn's Mercy, and the names of any other non-human lives lost as a direct result of human action in this campaign. She met his gaze. We do not hide from the cost. We etch it in stone, so we never forget its weight. Kalen felt the cold fear stir again. Why? Why such a ritual? Is it guilt? It is responsibility, Lee corrected gently. Guilt is passive. Responsibility is active. We remember the Dawn's Mercy, so that the next Captain Silas, facing an impossible choice, remembers that the math has faces and names, and that the weight of those names will be carried forever. We are not perfect, Commander. We are volatile, emotional, and often brutal. But we strive not to be savages. The wall is our conscience. She gestured to the device. I'm also here to give you this. It is the full, unedited sensor logs and bridge recordings of the unyielding Resolve, from the moment they receive your distress call to the final second of transmission. Captain Silas mandated it be released to you, specifically in the event of her death. Why me? Because you saw them, Lee said simply. Not the monsters of the Accord files, not the idealized heroes of legend. You saw the truth, the ugly, beautiful, terrible truth of them. She believed you deserved the whole picture. For days, Kalen sequestered himself with the data crystal. He did not just watch the tactical logs. He listened to the private bridge audio. He heard Silas and Rourke arguing about the Scorched Sky protocol, Silas's voice breaking as she gave the order, Rourke's stoic silence afterwards. He heard the crew's black humor, their songs, their quiet conversations about home. He heard a young technician, hours before the end, crying softly for her mother, and the gruff comfort offered by a Marine. He heard Silas, in her final private log entry, her voice stripped bare of all command pretense, whispering, I'm sorry. For all of it. Tell them I'm sorry. He saw the fear in their eyes, hidden behind the resolve. He saw the love they had for each other, a bond so fierce it made their sacrifices possible. He saw that they were not fearless gods of war, but fragile, mortal beings who had chosen collectively and individually to stand and burn so others might live. The final piece of the fear unlocked. It was not just fear of their power or their decisions. It was the fear of understanding their profound, tragic humanity. They were a mirror reflecting back the universe's cruelty and their terrifying, glorious refusal to simply reflect it. They absorbed it, took it into themselves, and answered it with a light that could blind. A month later, standing before the reassembled Galactic Accord Council, Kalen was asked to give his definitive report on the human incident. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from 100 species. The mood was one of relief, but also deep apprehension. Proposals were being drafted to manage the human threat, to create new containment protocols, to treat them as a useful but deadly weapon to be locked away until needed. Kalen took the podium. He looked out at the gathered faces, so many of which had been content to let Elusia die. "You have asked for my assessment of humanity," he began, his voice echoing in the silent chamber. "The Accord files are correct. They are hyper-aggressive. They are emotionally volatile. They are unpredictable and destructive. They wield their own lives and the lives of others with a calculus that is horrifying to behold." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. He continued, his voice growing stronger. "They are also the only reason I am standing here today. The only reason Elusia still turns in the void. They asked for nothing. They received only condemnation and fear. And when the true darkness came, the darkness that you chose to hide from, they did not hide. They stood. They fought with a courage that was not the absence of fear, but the absolute conquest of it. They fought for us, a people they did not know, because to them, the principle was simple. Life must stand against the devourer." He activated a display, showing the final sensor image of the unyielding resolve streaking towards the brown dwarf, a tiny spear of light against infinite dark. They are not a weapon to be controlled. They are not a typhoon to be weathered. They are a choice. The universe presents us with endless devourers, of flesh, of hope, of freedom. Humanity is the answer to that. They're the ones who will step into the path. They will break the rules. They will shatter your paradigms, and they will break your hearts with the terrible price of their protection. He looked around, meeting the eyes of each species representative. "You wish to fear them? Then fear this. Fear the day when the darkness comes for you, and you look to the stars for help, and find they're no longer looking back. Because you chose to fear the match, and in doing so, you were left alone in the dark." He stepped down from the podium. The chamber was utterly silent. No proposals for containment were voted on that day. Years later, on a restored Elusia, in a quiet garden built with both illusion crystal and hulks of human alloy salvaged from the battle, Kalen stood before a monument. It was not a grand statue. It was two simple walls intersecting. One was of smooth illusion crystal, glowing softly with inscribed light, the names of their lost. The other was of rough, cold Terran steel, etched with human names: Silas, Rourke, Vega, and all the others. In the center, where the walls met, was a small, clear plaque. It read, "Here stands the intersection of sacrifice and salvation. We remember the price. We fear the day it must be paid again." Kalen, now an elder, placed a hand on the cold steel. The true fear had never left him. It was his constant companion, his teacher. It was the fear that made him appreciate the peace of the green sky above, the laughter of his grandchildren. It was the fear that reminded him of the cost of that peace. He had fought side by side with humanity, and he had learned that true fear was not of death or pain, but of the boundless, terrible, and beautiful capacity for love that could make a species stare down both and say, "For you, we will go into the dark." And in that fear, he finally found peace.